Hi, I'm Nate the Bias User. We are back with a new collection of albums I want to talk about. I will start with the Drake album, For All the Dogs. First Person Shooter is a banger, thank God, and I'm glad Tizo Touchdown made his way on any Drake song. I can't imagine the track A-Man without him. And while most of these tracks aren't terrible, they're not great enough for me to appreciate the majority of the record. And to add insult to injury, this thing is an hour and a half long. But what do you expect? It's fucking Drake, it's what he does. But I guess this is his most tolerable solo record he dropped this decade. 5 out of 10. With the new Carson, A Great Chaos, it can be decent at times. My favorite track, Nightcore, is a dancing good time, but overall, this is a lot of tasteless electronics. I'm gonna give this album a 4.4. I was anticipating this blonde Redhead album, Sit Down for Dinner, just for my liking of the single Melody Experiment, a track I really got lost in, with the dreamy psychedelic feel that stood out the most on the ending. But sadly, the rest of this album didn't maintain the engagement. It's a vibe though. I'm gonna give this album a 5.2. The debut Snõõper record, Super Snõõper, while super fast-paced, I find that when paired with the rawness not having much detail, makes the record pretty hard to grasp. It's okay, but not something I was totally blown away by. 5.4. I was already anticipating a new Jane Remover record, but that anticipation grew even more after she recently dropped the record Grave Robbing under her alter ego Leroy, which was an amazing mashup record, and with my thoughts on this newest record under her main character, Census Designated, is very well detailed in production, even with the static sounds. And along with the production being a step up, I'm also finding her singing to be a lot more expressive than usual, resulting in a handful of great tracks. But with this album as a whole, I just wish there were a variety of tracks that raised the tempo rather than having an hour and 2 minute slow burn, which I did end up getting fed up with around the back end. But with my complaints for the overall record, this wasn't a unique and interesting experience. And I mentioned this before, Jane has evolved as a producer. I'm gonna give this album a 6.9. On this recent Glock album, Glockoma 2, I wasn't crazy about every song, but I'm still blown away by how this, on a surface level, typical gangster rap album is so fun to listen to. These tracks really bop, and I also like Glock's chill, but on point with the beat rat flow. I'm kind of ashamed this slipped under my radar, but I guess this isn't the kind of music I typically vibe with. But with this, I am definitely vibing with this one. It's a 7.4. With this new Mountain Goats album, Jenny from Thebes, while a pretty solid record, I couldn't help but feel underwhelmed after the first couple of tracks. And even with John Darnell providing his exciting and adventurous vocals, it can only do so much when I get fed up with the polished folk sounds on tracks that don't seem to make the biggest attempts at standing out in their own way. But the tracks are still listenable, and there were tracks earlier on such as Clean Slate, Only One Way, and Fresh Tattoo I thought were all good. I'm gonna give this album a 6.2. Moving on the new Slater record, Starfucker, and I said this before on albums of other electropop artists, but this album is having the same problems of a lot of newer electropop artists, which is being tasteless as hell, relying on a more spacey and hard-hitting style just to keep a relative amount of engagement, and I just don't get the appeal. But to acknowledge what I do like, Slater does seem to click well with these instrumentals, and she's just a fun singer in general. I'm gonna give this album a 5.2. Danny Brown has finally followed through with dropping a record after turning 40 entitled Quaranta, which is basically a sequel to the album Triple X, with Quaranta being Italian for 40, but to the music this is very much a lot more low-key compared to most of what he's dropped, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, yes, I do listen to this record, sometimes missing the exciting and out there nature from Danny's previous works. But at the same time, the softer approach does wonders to the tracks where Danny gets more personal. While I may not prefer this record over Danny Brown's 30 Years of Age, and certainly not over the masterpiece that was Atrocity Exhibition, this is a Danny Brown record worth checking out. I'm gonna give this album a 7.4. On to another abstract hip-hop record. We have Integrated Tech Solution by Aesop Rock, and it was hitting surprisingly hard and had very fun and experimental beats and a long track list. But with its long track list that was an hour and 4 minutes, mostly in the beginning of the second half, there was a fair amount of tracks that didn't blow me away all that much, but I liked most of the songs though. 7.3. What we have here is a Latin artist, Alan Paloma, paying homage to 80s synth pop in the most fun way possible on World of Hustle. The album's not perfect, but it's brightening nevertheless. 7.2. The long-awaited but not long expected flute-playing new age ambient record from Andre 3000, New Blue Sun, is here, and Andre very much performs on this record in an I Am an Outcast member type of way. Very soulful, and we get that reminder for an hour and a half. And to my enjoyment, I listened to the first track, I swear I really wanted to make a rap album, and loved it, But as I went further, I couldn't find anything else while still listenable to get to me the way the first track did. The progression on that song was too good and spiritual. I'm gonna give this album a 5.7. TK Meza has finally dropped a full-length record after her Last Year Was Weird EP trilogy. But I guess my love of those records set my expectations a little too high, because this record, Sweet Justice, is paying it very safe compared to what I've heard before, having me on the fence with pretty much every song on the record, except the track with Flume, Splint Assassin. That song is fucking crazy. But this is an overall definition of a disappointing album. 5.4. With the new Dorian Electra Fanfare, I'm having the hardest time getting into the physical instruments and breezy and spacey production displayed on these tracks. But if they're catchy enough, they might catch the ear. I felt that way with the track Anon, but personally, I'd give this album a 5.7. The new Poppy record, Zig, seems to be a lot more polished compared to her 2021 record, despite being relatively industrial. But it's polished to the point where it's actually annoying. And to the qualities, I do think her singing has improved, but my god, I am dying listening to this. 3.9. So check this out. We have a 2-hour King Giz record. Oh wait, let me finish. We have a double King Giz record. No, actually, we have two of the same King Giz record, with the second being an extended version, which wasn't something I found to be all that necessary, because what exactly can be done to make these already established normal length tracks have more put on top of it? But believe it or not, I ended up preferring the extended 10 to 20 minute versions more than the normal length cuts. So much so that when returning to the shorter versions, they kind of felt like teases to the longer versions, like a free OnlyFans video. And while these tracks are still solid, I was very much preferring the synth solos and phases that were only present on the 10 to 20 minute version of each song. And outside of the lengths, I'm appreciating the dance music approach. But I can't help but feel I could hear better out of what they're all doing. So this is a decent record, but there is far more potential that can be met. I'm gonna give this album a 6.4. On the new Audiotrix Point Never album, again, not a disappointing progressive electronic album, but not entirely blown away by it. I'm gonna give this album a 6.2. The self-titled Spiritual Cramp album is a very fun, catchy, and polished garage punk album that is well balanced, even with the rawness of noises in the mix. But I was kind of upset how the garage punk riffs started feeling a little overplayed on the later tracks. I'm gonna give this album a 7.3. The new hip-hop record from producer Blockhead, The Ox, contains a good amount of the abstract hip-hop usuals, such as Aesop Rock, Quayle Chris, and the Arm & Hammer homies, Billy Woods and Elucid. But even when featuring artists I'm not so familiar with, I was liking a higher majority of the material here. There would just occasionally be instrumentals I wasn't really into. I'm gonna give this album a 7.3. I was appreciating how unique and thick the production was on this Latin pop record, Autopoetica, if I'm pronouncing it right, by Mon Laferte. But I still couldn't help but notice some hesitation in execution, even though I did find some out there experimentation shown, but I still wasn't highly blown away by this thing. I'm gonna give this album a 5.1. Frost Children surprisingly dropped another album this year that leans more to softer alt-rock than anything else. Not as much in the digital stuff, but it's still a good time. I'm gonna give this album a 7.1. That's it. Like, subscribe, comment how you feel, like, give a suggestion. Check out my other social medias, and I'll see you next time.